In the prophecies of Jesus and the prophets in the Bible, there are ancient passages of scriptures with signs that were foretold thousands of years ago that are secrets to understanding what's happening now in world events. So it's incredibly important to be aware of the signs of our times and how they connect with the prophecies of the Holy Scriptures, because they're happening just like the Bible said. And now we see that the Syrian regime with Russia and Iran did not care what the U.S. said about their military offensive into Daraa Province in southwest Syria at Israel's border. They ignored the U.S. and Israel's warnings not to break the de-escalation zone agreement that was in place, and Russia and Syria with Iran launched the military campaign. They are approaching the offensive in Daraa Province the same way they did previous campaigns in Aleppo and Ghouta, committing war crimes as the world stands by, afraid to confront Russia for now, as the Russians mercilessly bomb neighborhoods, homes, and hospitals, indiscriminately killing not only rebels, but women and children. And then the Syrian army moves into the bombed-out areas to take control. And if there's continued resistance to what Assad wants, then the butcher of Damascus can then lay down a chemical attack whenever he needs it. Already, the bombing raids by Russian warplanes struck 3 hospitals in the Syrian province of Daraa, with no information on the fate of medical staff or the patients inside the facilities. Here's footage that reportedly shows the attacks in Daraa Province on the hospitals and civilians. Realize that you're seeing real live war footage of the signs of the last days prophecies not far from the border of Israel and the Euphrates River.
The Syrian regime is moving forward with a new offensive to completely recapture the southern city of Daraa, partially controlled by rebel forces. The aim is to push all the way to the Jordanian border. Nearly 50 civilians have been killed since the assault began on June 19th, says the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. Electricity to the city has been cut, and several hospitals have ceased functioning. The Assad regime does eventually regain control of Quneitra and the Syrian Golan Heights. The future of the local Sunni population, as well as many of the refugees seeking shelter there, will be brought into question.
The Syrian civilians are fleeing for their lives, with at first over 10,000 people reportedly fleeing the province. Then it was 50,000, and now reports say 270,000 people have fled toward Jordan or Israel. Ironically, many of the refugees are fleeing toward Israel and the Golan, thinking they would be safer near Israel from the Russian and Syrian bombing. Already, the Israeli army has provided hundreds of tents and tons of food, including baby food, medical supplies, and clothes and shoes to the Syrian refugees. But Israel also warned Syria, cautioning their army forces to keep their distance as they sweep through rebel-held areas toward the border. And as a precaution, Israel beefed up its military deployment on the Golan Heights frontier with Syria, with Israel's military deploying tank and artillery reinforcements to the Golan in light of developments on the Syrian Golan Heights. So it's getting tense, as expected, With the de-escalation zone agreement now blown to bits by Russia and Syria, and in the smoke of war, it can most likely get messy, with there being some military ordnance or overflights nearing or crossing the contested Syrian-Israeli border that will superheat the tensions even more. But no matter how messy it may get, Russia will pacify the Daraa Province and will eventually put the Syrian army back on their border with Israel at the Golan Heights. Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has already said Syrian troops should be positioned again on the border with the Golan Heights, and Russia will continue to do whatever it wants in this area of Syria until only God stops them in the future. But Russia and Putin, in their devious way, like to be seen as the strong but rational and even ambivalent actor in the Middle East. And they will, at the right opportune moment, after they help Syria get position in their territory again, then suddenly push for a deal to be put into place between the parties, also with Israel and Jordan. Already there have been signs of Russia negotiating, as currently there are talks between Russian negotiators and the Syrian opposition over a peace deal in some rebel-held towns in southwestern Syria, if they will accept the return of Bashar al-Assad's rule. But we could expect any future Russian deal put in place between the parties with Israel and Jordan to also leave the Syrian regime back at the contested Golan Heights border, and also leave Iran and their proxies in southwest Syria, but at a distance away from Israel's border, and with Russia saying they will provide some type of guarantee for Israel's security, which Israel would trustingly accept from Russia. And then, just as the Gog of Magog prophecy in Ezekiel 38 foretold, this would put a peace deal in place, having the actors in place at the contested Golan Heights border of Israel, to where Israel could in the future be surprised by Magog Russia and its Arab allies crossing over into Israel as the prophecy foretells. But for now, when Russia and Syria have the southwest Daraa Province retaken, and with the Syrian regime back in place at the Golan Heights border, Russia and Syria will have full operational control of western and southern Syria, to where in the future other Arab allies can also place military forces there. And with a Russia-brokered deal for a cessation of hostilities in place with Israel and Jordan, then Russia and Syria, with their back covered, could turn around and turn their attention fully to retaking what they really want and desperately need to pay for the war and rebuild the country. And that is the riches of eastern Syria that's in the natural resources in the land just on the other side of the Euphrates River, which is the river where a Revelation prophecy says that the worst world war ever for humankind will start, leading to the death of 1/3 of the population of the earth. The Holy Scriptures foretold these signs we are seeing now around what is happening and coming soon in the future, pointing to the coming of Jesus Christ. We are going beyond the prophetic red line of prophecy, now experiencing perilous times in these last days. Only God knows what will exactly happen, but He is allowing us to see the signs of the last days prophecies in this season, just as described in the Holy Scriptures, so we know the end of the age is drawing near, giving us the opportunity to prepare ourselves for the coming of Jesus Christ by being born again spiritually into His kingdom through the water and spirit baptisms, as Jesus and His apostles described in John the 3rd chapter and Acts of the Apostles, the 2nd chapter in the Bible. For the world, the last days will be the end time. But for those born again in Jesus Christ, the last days are not the end, but the beginning of a wonderful new future as an immortal with Jesus Christ, ruling the world from Jerusalem.